And I'm very happy to be here with the wonderful ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Nancy Mace. In 1943, in West Virginia versus Barnett, the Supreme Court struck down compulsory flag salutes as a violation of the First Amendment, stating, if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it's that no official, no matter how high or petty, shall prescribe what shall be orthodox in matters of politics, religion, nationalism, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. Then in 1969, in a case called Tinker versus Des Moines School District, which struck down Mary Beth Tinker's suspension from middle school for refusing to remove her black armband in protest of the Vietnam War, the court affirmed that neither teachers nor students shed their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. In 1982, most relevant to our hearing today, in Board of Education versus PICO, the Supreme Court rejected the effort by a town school board in New York State to strip objectionable books from public school libraries. The members had gone to a conference promoting censorship of offensive and vulgar books and came back with a target hit list, the kind of hit list which is now familiar to us, including Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, Best Short Stories of Negro Writers, edited by Langston Hughes, Go Ask Alice by an anonymous author, Black Boy by Richard Wright. And after widely brandishing a compilation of the most prurient and lurid and profane passages, the board actually overrode its own censorship committee, which had recommended purging only 2 books from the schools, and went ahead and censored 9 of them. When the case made it to the Supreme Court, the majority sided with the students, who were claiming that the removal of books from the school library affected a form of political and ideological thought control totally antithetical to the First Amendment of the Constitution. Justice Brennan, who had been nominated to the court by Republican President Eisenhower, announced the judgment of the court and delivered an opinion that was joined by Justice John Paul Stevens, who'd been nominated by President Ford, Justice Harry Blackmun, who'd been nominated to the court by President Nixon, and Justice Thurgood Marshall, who had been nominated to the court by President Johnson. So this was a decision dominated by Supreme Court justices who had been nominated to the court by GOP presidents, which is something that we need to think about, because I hope, Ms. Mace, that everything we talk about today will transcend the traditional party lines. In Board of Education versus PICO, Justice Brennan found that the Constitution protects not just the right to speak and to write, but the right to receive information and ideas. The First Amendment plays the central role in affording the public access to discussion, debate, and the dissemination of information and ideas. Freedom of inquiry, the court ruled, extends to school libraries, and the selective removal of books from school libraries because someone considers the content offensive directly and sharply implicates students' free speech and thought. In school libraries, the regime of voluntary inquiry holds sway. The answer to books whose content or viewpoint you oppose or even deplore, check out this powerful logic, is to not read them or to write a negative review, or even, shades of Voltaire here, to write your own book in answer. The First Amendment, I used to tell my constitutional law students, is like Abraham Lincoln's golden apple of liberty. It's like an apple, and everybody just wants to take one bite out of it. Somebody hates left-wing speech, and somebody hates right-wing speech and wants to censor it, and somebody hates hate speech about gay people, and someone wants to censor speech about the love lives of gay people, and someone wants to censor Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn because it uses the N-word, and someone else wants to censor Ibram Kendi's anti-racist baby because they think it means that babies can be racists. Everybody wants to take just 1 or 2 bites out of the apple, but if we allow all those bites, there's no apple left. The freedom of speech disappears. The way to save the apple for all of us is to learn to tolerate the speech you abhor as well as the speech you agree with. It's not always easy, but this is incumbent upon people living in a free democratic society. If we cancel or censor everything that people find offensive, nothing will be left. Everybody is offended by something, and that's why other people's level of offense cannot be the metric for defining whether your rights or my rights are vaporized. There's a famous story about Lenny Bruce, the somewhat risque comedian from the middle of the last century. And someone said his show should be shut down because it offended him. And Lenny Bruce said from the stage, "My parents came to America in order to be offensive and not to be thrown in jail for it." Now, during National Library Week, a time to celebrate intellectual curiosity, scholarship, freedom of inquiry, and free expression, basic intellectual freedoms are under attack again. In 2021, the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom recorded the highest numbers of censorious challenges to library books in its 20 years of tracking this data. 729 efforts to censor nearly 1,600 books. And in Texas, just one of these attempts to censor books, implemented by a state legislator, has initiated the systematic review of at least 850 books in every school district in the state. There are over 1,000 school districts and 8,000 public schools in the Lone Star State. This challenge will require tens of thousands of teachers, librarians, and administrators to spend hundreds of thousands of hours reviewing the books to implement a regime of censorship at a time when school resources are already stretched thin and states across the country are facing teacher and staff shortages. The vast majority of books being targeted are not mandatory or part of the curriculum. They are books of choice. Students can pull them off the shelves if they want to and check them out, or they can ignore them entirely. What books are being targeted? Well, some old favorite targets are back, like Catcher in the Rye, Native Son, Huckleberry Finn. I would also, let's see, but there are also a bunch of these books I brought here. Seahorse. We're going to hear today from the great Ruby Bridges, whose book Ruby Bridges Goes to School has been the target of censorship moves. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which is who is a Nobel Prize-winning author. A kid's book about racism has been targeted for censorship. A book called Hair Love. The infamous anti-racist baby book, Little Legends, Exceptional Men in Black History, and finally, Little Dreamers, Visionary Women Around the World. So these are some of the most common books that are being targeted right now. Obviously, it's a legitimate subject for parents, teachers, principals, and school boards to discuss which books are the best and most age-appropriate curricular choices for different age groups and grades. This is what educators do, and the best ones include families, parents, and experts in the decision-making process all across the country. But that normal curricular and library selection process is completely different from whipping people up into a moral panic over the use of this or that word or passage in a book and then demanding its removal from a school library. Fashions and censorship change. For a great deal of our history, books were censored because they were considered indecent or politically subversive. For example, of the slavery system, like Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was seized, censored, and burned in many southern states as propaganda. Many books are being targeted for censorship these days simply because they address racism or white supremacy as historical or sociological realities, or address human sexuality or LGBTQ issues because the protagonist or author is gay or a person of color or for some other allegedly objectionable reason. Finally, I'm not quite sure where this is, if you can give me this. I wrote a book which was censored called We the Students, or I'm sorry, forgive me, I correct myself. It has not been censored yet, but it's being targeted for removal from the schools in Texas. We the Students was amazingly sponsored by the Supreme Court's own historical society. It analyzes the constitutional freedoms of young people in public schools. It looks at a whole bunch of cases that affect kids in public schools, like censorship of newspapers in your books and locker searches and drug testing. And I am certain now that it must be the first book ever sponsored by the Supreme Court's own historical society, which is now being targeted for censorship. I only wish that the aspiring censors would read my discussion of Board of Education versus PICO at page 59 in my book before they censor it, because it tells them everything they need to know about how it is illegitimate to strip books from school libraries because somebody disagrees with it. Okay, so the books on The poster boards have all been targeted for censorship or actually banned from schools. This Is Your Time by Ruby Bridges, a remarkable figure in the American Civil Rights Movement, who we have the honor of hearing from today, has been challenged and targeted for censorship. Why? Simply because it said that a book describing the story of how a little girl who was one of the first to integrate public schools in her native Louisiana in the midst of a racist backlash may make white children feel uncomfortable. And this, I think, radically understates the powers of empathy, compassion, and solidarity that all children, or most children, have and are capable of developing. It also suggests that the actual lived experiences of people should be suppressed if learning of their experiences would make other people uncomfortable, a far-fetched, unworkable, and unjust principle that cuts against the fundamental American idea of free expression. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mace for your opening statement.